Hello, and welcome to our Throwback Thursday show, Better Than a Cup of Espresso. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I am talking today and reviewing the importance of understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, Abraham Maslow put forth this theory, I don't know, a million years ago, and it's something that was introduced to me for the first time during my bachelor's degree program so I got a bachelor's degree in human services, which would be the equivalent now of almost like a social worker. Now I know all my social workers are going to be like, no, it's more intense, and that's accurate. The social work credential is definitely more intense than the human service credential. But my point being is that this is going to be in most psychology, like 101 courses, you're going to be learning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I would say that in a clinic day here in my office, I discuss Maslow's hierarchy of needs daily anytime I'm working with clients. Not with every client per se, but at least on a daily basis, I am referring back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the reason for that is because it's a very easy to understand. Once you grasp that concept, it's a really easy way to explain why or what's going on for a person, to help them better understand why they might be struggling to reach their goals or behave in the manner that is important to them. And so this is definitely one of our foundational topics. And so, Alex, if you can go ahead and pull up our Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. So one of the interesting things that the D of my logo in the background, ignore the D in the logo, it kind of blends into the graphic here. But, oh, hey, way to go, Alex. See, this is why you have somebody super awesome behind the scenes, y'all. Alex is amazing. Thank you, Alex. Okay, so this is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I was able to get this graphic for free off of the internet, so I don't have anybody to credit it for, but there's lots of, if you Google Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're going to get a whole bunch of images. This is definitely not my favorite one, and so we're going to break these down a little bit today. But really what I want to illustrate is that in order for a person to experience that green and that blue level, so for this image, we're going to call it the green or the blue level, in order for us to experience self-confidence and be proud of our achievements, in order for us to live up to the person that we want to be, we've got to make sure that we have the things. So we've got the red, the less red, and the orange level. We've got to make sure that those needs are being met. And really the way that I look at this is biology comes before morality. And a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, especially if you're in a religious setting. They're going to say, no, our morality is more important. But I'd really like for you to stick with me so that I can explain how this works. So here at the very bottom of our hierarchy, or our little pyramid, is our physiological needs. And so physiological means things you absolutely have to have for life to continue. So things like oxygen, water, food, the ability to sleep through the night. If we are not getting consistently good sleep, we know from a biological perspective that the natural byproduct of chronic insomnia is increased anxiety. If it gets really bad, you'll start hallucinating. They actually utilize sleep deprivation as a torture technique, because when you get that tired, you are going to have issues with functioning. They talk about reproduction. So I'm not sure necessarily on this one why they use it as reproduction. On the one that I have here in my office wall, we talk about the biological need for sex. And so we're talking about sexual safety, which also bleeds up into that lighter red one. But also for a lot of us, when we are feeling sexually frustrated, it literally causes pain, especially in our male counterparts. Males will talk about the physiological or the physical discomfort that comes if they're not able to ejaculate on a regular basis. And that is a biological need that we've attached a lot of morality and rules around because of societal or religious rules. As we move up, we then talk about safety. We're talking about the safety of our resources, safety within our family. And when we get a little bit further in, I'm going to break down that safety a little bit differently. Our next step up on this one is love and belonging, and that is absolutely accurate. Again, I'm looking at this. The one on my wall has a different color scheme, so I might get that a little mixed up here in a little bit. And again, when we get a little bit further into the podcast, I've broken that down. And we have to have this love and belonging, the physical, emotional, spiritual safety, and then we have to have our physiological needs, food, water, air, those types of things, in order to function in a space where we are meeting the expectations that we have for ourselves. One of the things, so Alex, you can go ahead and eliminate that if you'd like to there, but one of the things that I hear a lot are things like, well, they should know better, or, what, they're overreacting, or I'm overreacting, or what's wrong with me? Why can't I be honest? Why can't I feel good about myself? Or I'm always noticing where I need improvement, what's going on there. And a lot of that can be explained and understood by recognizing this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So for example, it's very difficult for a person, unless there's a lack of empathy. So no, we're talking about like psychopaths, where there's that psychopathology, meaning a gross lack of empathy. It's very difficult for somebody to feel confident if they don't have a community or a family that they feel that they belong in. Now, having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, I don't really belong in my family, but I've got this great community of friends. That community of friends could meet your need for connection and belonging, and you can have self-confidence in that way. But the point being that we need to have those relationship connections in order for us to have a sense of worth in our environment. And so what I did is I broke these down a little bit into an easier lay language. And so Alex, if you can pull up our reds and oranges today, I put this again at the bottom. Now, I will say I prefer the colors of the one I have hanging in my office, but we're going to go with the ones that matched the image I was able to pull off of the internet. So the bottom one talks about our physiology, and really our physiology is our biological needs, or the things that you need to do to keep yourself alive. But that isn't necessarily 100% explanatory. There's more to it. And what we're talking about here is the relationship with that amygdala, or our fight or flight response. And so when we talk about needing to get to a place of physiological homeostasis, what that means is that we need to be in a place where our physiology is in balance. And so some of those things are going to be things like a regular body temperature. So I put 98.6 degrees. Obviously, there's going to be some variation in those numbers, but this means I am fever-free. My body is at a normal temperature. I'm not too hot. I'm not too cold. Because when our bodies are overheated, or we're too cold, or we've got a fever, our amygdala is in a place where it is more sensitive to have a survival response activation. We call those false activations, because I'm not in a life-threatening situation, but my brain is recognizing that there is a threat to my body. And so remember, when that amygdala gets fired up, our frontal cortex, or our rational, logical reasoning skills, go down. So we've got this kind of this tug and pull here. So other physiological indicators of being in a state of quote unquote homeostasis, or physiological balance means that my resting heart rate is around 80 beats per minute. Unless you're a marathon runner. If you're a marathon runner, then we're going to see those numbers be closer to like 50s and 60s. I've even seen one marathon runner, theirs was like their resting heart rate was in the 40s, and doctor gave the all clear that things were fine. It was because they were an extreme athlete. And so when you're an extreme athlete, we see those normal ranges for resting heart rate will be adjusted. So for most of us who are not extreme runners or extreme athletes, we're going to see or want to see our resting heart rate somewhere in the 80s range. So that can be, your 70s, 80s, and your low 90s would still be considered normal. When I'm doing couples therapy, I put a little pulse oximeter monitor on couples' fingers, and anytime their resting heart rate gets up over 100 beats per minute, we stop the conversation so that they can physiologically soothe through deep breathing exercises. Or I've even had clients be like, hey, I'm going to exit the office for a minute and go walk around the building a couple of times and come back. They take a break to physiologically soothe in order to get their rational brain back into a good place and get those heart rates lower. Because once again, in order to function in our green and yellow area, it was green and yellow. It might have been blue and green. I don't even remember now. Whatever the colors were, what we're going to get to here. In my office, it's green and yellow. So that's why I'm saying green and yellow. But in order for us to get up to that higher level of functioning, we need to have physiological homeostasis, which means our heart rate needs to be at normal, healthy levels. This is going to be normal blood pressure. This is 98% oxygen saturation or better. This is my digestive tract is working. I'm peeing and pooping the way that I need to. Because when we are constipated, our amygdala gets a little bit more sensitive because things are not functioning the way that they are supposed to. This is why individuals who suffer from chronic illnesses or, IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome and those types of things often struggle with feeling calm and relaxed. There's going to, we see higher incidences of anxiety. We see, shorter tempers, shorter fuses, more tiredness. That's normal because our body is trying to get to a place of balance. Our next step up here on the safety, one of the things I want to talk about is that safety isn't just about our physical safety. We've got to talk about our emotional safety, our mental safety. So mental, again, is more about our cognitive health. So things like I need to make sure that as I express my ideas, that I'm not being met with criticism or character attacks. If I am being met when I share my ideas with somebody and I get criticized in a non-healthy way, so we're talking about character attacks rather than healthy constructive criticism, it's normal, again, for my amygdala to get activated. And when I'm in that place where people are being, very cruel or purposefully degrading who I am as a human, that means that it is normal for me to have a more difficult time living to the morals and standards that I've set for myself. So emotional safety means that I'm able to express happiness, sadness, anger in a way that I am still loved and accepted. I'm still respected as a human being. And so that's about giving space to other people. And even for myself, I've got to give that space to myself to be in a place where I feel emotional safety. And then spiritual safety, again, remember when we're talking about behavioral health, I identify spirituality not as a religious thing, but as an ability to connect with other living things or connect with my higher power, whether that higher power is Allah or Jesus Christ or Buddha. What we find across cultures and contexts here is that if I'm able to connect with something that I feel is more powerful than me or nature or other human beings, then my spiritual health is intact. So spirituality does not equal religiosity in this sense or in this case. Just want to make that very clear. Our next step up is the belonging and connection. So once again, if I'm stuck and I've got a deficit in my safety arena, let's say that I'm in a family function and I'm being criticized in an unhealthy way, which has happened to me quite a bit since I left the Mormon church, mostly in my husband's family, the way that they express their emotions or their thoughts and feelings is to discredit mine. So it's almost this dynamic of we can't agree to disagree. I have to be right. And unfortunately, when I'm being attacked in that way, I lose my sense of self. So that person I want to be, I then also become guilty of, no, my way is the only right way. I'm no longer living up to my full potential. And I become and do or say things that I'm not necessarily proud of because that amygdala gets triggered, because my cognitive or my mental safety is, there's a deficit in that safety area, which interferes with my ability to feel like I belong and like I have connection in my family. So if I'm not in an environment where repair attempts come frequently when there have been emotional wounds or whatnot, then that is going to influence my sense of self-worth and the other things that I have going on in my life. And so in that belonging and connection area, we're going to see, do we have friendships and peer relationships where we feel like we belong and we feel like we're, plugged in and connected there? Or do we feel like we're having to change something about ourselves in order to fit in? You're going to have that same question for your partnership or within your community. This is why we see a lot of, congregation and in our milieus or in our societies. Like, it is normal for people who identify as LGBT to kind of congregate with other people who identify as LGBT, because they're able to feel like they belong and there's a strong connection in those groups. And as they kind of group together, then they are able to identify people who don't identify as LGBT, but who feel like they're safe places for those who do identify in that. We can, hey, Sarah is a safe person to talk to because I've had positive experiences with her. So we kind of see that community stretch out, but we tend to, as humans, need to get into tribes that feel and think the same way we think and feel in order to feel like we belong and we connect. And once we have that in that smaller tribe, that's when we're able to kind of expand that. So once again, you don't necessarily have to have a family that you feel like you completely belong and connect in. If you've got that in your friendships or in your community, you can still achieve self-actualization. So if there's any questions about these bottom three yet, Alex, if you want to throw those up on the screen. I know that our audience is still small as these are still new, but I want to make sure that I answer any questions about these bottom three tiers before moving on. So one of the questions, hi Amanda, it's great to see you again. So how does one approach working in a collaborative project with someone who is not verbally kind? I want to work on the project, but the critical nature of the working partner is not supportive. Is there a way to stay safe? I'm going to say, yeah, absolutely. I like to talk about armoring up. So if I know that I am temporarily entering an environment that doesn't feel safe for whatever reason, I am going to go into that environment prepared to respond and navigate that feeling where there's a lack of safety. So one of the things that I've done, like with my in-laws specifically, is that I've learned that I need to not engage so that I'm not throwing fuel onto a flame in an environment that I don't feel safe in. Now, this can get really difficult when the person you don't feel safe around is at work. I actually had a conversation just a little while ago with my 21-year-old where he was talking about, I just get so frustrated because this person that I'm working with doesn't respect me at all. And so I always just feel anxious and angry and whatnot. And so one of the things, Amanda, that I like to talk about is practicing radical acceptance, which is, for whatever reason, I don't need to identify it, this individual is not able or willing to treat me in a manner that I feel comfortable with. Therefore, my response is I'm going to purposefully not engage on an emotional level. I am going to purposefully allow a lot of what is being said roll off my shoulders. I'm going to purposefully or intentionally disengage certain parts of my brain so that I can get through my workday. So that's step one. Step number two, though, is you've got to have your tribe and that belonging and connection. You've got to have that tribe that you can go to and vent about it and talk about it. So either with a friend, a family member, a counselor, somebody, you want to be able to discuss those feelings and that emotion in order to finish up your emotional cycle so that you can get through that. The other thing is if it might be time for a job change, because one of the things you're going to recognize is if I know I'm going into a situation where I'm not going to be emotionally safe, I'm going to want to make sure that I go into that fed, well rested. I'm going to go back into that physiological homeostasis and make sure that I'm getting the oxygen I need, that I'm getting the sleep I need, I'm getting the food that I need, that I'm taking deep breaths, that I'm taking breaks. You might need to increase how often you're taking breaks. And if this is an environment that is consistent and it's something you have to go through every single day and it's starting to wear on you, it might be time for an environmental change. I would absolutely advocate for environmental change. I hope that answers your question. Is there any other question? Oh, yes, radical acceptance. Thank you. Yes, I love radical acceptance. Definitely something that we're going to be talking about in the future on one of our Throwback Thursday shows, because it is so vital to functioning. And you're actually going to see that acceptance piece come in our Alex, I don't remember what color the other one was, green and yellow or blue and green or whatever color it was. If you can give me those top tier ones there. So this is where we are going to start seeing that acceptance. So Amanda, if you look there in the blue, at the very bottom, we've got acceptance, and that's our ability to accept the things that we cannot change. So before we jump ahead, though, let's talk about esteem. So esteem here, so on your screen, this is in the green area. Esteem means that when you've got those bottom three tiers met, that you are going to find that you have more respect for yourself. You're going to have increased self-confidence in yourself. Now, that also means in those bottom three tiers, do you feel like you belong? Are you feeling like you connect? And if you're finding deficits there, that could be why you're struggling with some self-confidence. You're going to have a better ability to recognize your own achievements as well as the achievements of other people. And so this became really important for me. I think we're back. Alex, are we back? You want to text me, are we back? Just make sure we are. Yep, we're back. Okay, so I apologize for that. My internet here at the office has been cutting in and out now for the last couple of days, so I'm going to have to call somebody and get that fixed. I apologize for the interruption. Okay, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs, take two. Yay. Okay, so with the esteem, one of the things I was saying before it froze out is that as those bottom three tiers, as we're meeting the needs in those bottom three tiers, you're going to find that you have more respect for yourself and for others, but you're also going to have a lot more self-confidence. As you recognize, hey, maybe I'm a little, shy, or I'm not experiencing that confidence, you're going to want to look, where is there a deficit in these bottom 3 tiers? So that way you can hopefully fill in that gap. But one of the things that really stood out to me with Maslow's hierarchy when I was younger was the fact that my ability to recognize my own achievements and be proud of myself increased as those bottom 3 tiers were met. But not only was I improving in the recognition of my own achievement, but I was able to recognize the achievements of others, specifically my children. So when I was growing up, my mom had a really hard time acknowledging when I had done something well. That was not a skill that she developed until she was much older, and I was like moved out of the house by then. So my younger siblings got a very different version of my mom than I got, which is actually pretty typical. And one of those reasons was because she didn't feel very confident in herself. And that comes back here to this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I feel confident in myself, if I'm able to respect myself and respect others more, and I'm able to be accountable for when I make mistakes, it also stands to reason that my ability to recognize the good in others improves. So as we hit this green area or this esteem, what we begin to see is people naturally begin to see the glass as half full rather than half empty. So we begin to see things in a more positive light, and we generally naturally do better at verbalizing that for other people. And then our top tier here in self-actualization means that we are meeting the goals and the values and morals that we hold for ourselves. We do a better job of maintaining healthy boundaries, meaning I'll say, this is my boundary, and I do a better job of honoring my own boundary. And I also have more respect for other people's boundaries and recognize I don't really understand your boundary, but I don't have a problem honoring that. And that's where we get when we get up into this blue zone. We also find that people begin to naturally no longer struggle with prejudices and extending judgment against other people. That is where that radical acceptance comes in, where we just say, that's the way things are, and I'm okay with that. Because when our bottom tier isn't being met, remember, our amygdala, our need to be defensive and protective, is fired up a little bit more. But when those bottom 3 tiers are met, everything in our brain is calmer and we don't feel the need. It's not there. It's almost like it kind of disappears naturally on its own as we have those bottom 3 tiers met. And so we have a lack of prejudice, and we don't necessarily judge things as harshly or as quickly when the bottom 3 tiers are met. We're more creative, we're better problem solvers, and again, with that acceptance, we're able to just accept things as the way they are more naturally as we hit those tiers. So one of the examples that I like to give that's really basic when people are like, yeah, I'm not quite sure that I'm understanding how all of this works, is I, Sarah Westbrook, personally believe that stealing is wrong. Even if I steal like a loaf of bread or some lunch meat from a big billion-dollar corporation like Walmart, I feel that my theft is still harming that company in some way. It harms somebody in some way. And therefore, in my opinion, stealing is morally wrong. However, if I was starving and didn't know where my next meal was coming from, and I didn't have the resources to get food, I can basically guarantee that my justification for doing something I feel is morally wrong is going to shift because my brain needs me to live. That is what that amygdala's job is to keep me alive. If I am drowning, and we see this in people who are drowning, where they might be, they're in the lake or the ocean or the swimming pool or whatever, and they're flailing around, and in their panic to get their head above water to breathe, they inadvertently dunk their rescuers. This is why people who are rescuing somebody who is drowning is at a higher risk of drowning, because in that panicked state of trying to get oxygen, you inadvertently push the person who's trying to rescue you under. Now, those are some pretty extreme examples to illustrate this point. And so, one of the things that I would love to do, a call to action to my listeners, is I would love for you to email me at daisygirlcommunications.com and ask me some questions about this and give me some of the examples you have where it's more subtle. Okay, where you're recognizing, hey, from the religious perspective that I experienced in Mormonism, one of the things that would happen for me is I didn't feel like my eternal salvation was in a safe place. I became more judgmental of myself and others because my pathway to heaven, I wasn't certain I was living, quote unquote, righteously enough. And so in that second tier, that safety tier, I didn't feel like my spiritual health was assured for whatever reason. Therefore, I was more anxious. I was more judgmental of myself and others. I had lower self-confidence. When I was able to release that fear and I was no longer concerned about my eternal salvation in that religious context, I found great peace. I found much better self-confidence. I found that I was more accepting of others. I found that I was more like the Savior Jesus Christ that I was striving to be when I gave up that religious dogma and was able to recognize, hey, my environment is safe. I'm doing the best I can. I'm good. I was able to then live up to the morals I was striving for during my time as a Mormon and do so with a lot less anxiety and a lot more love in my heart for others. So, Alex, are there any other questions that we've got from any listener? Hello, Pilot. Nice to see you back. Can you speak to how special needs persons can work with difficulties relating with others, since love, affection, and even sex seems important? Thinking of those issues, touching and relating. Yeah, so connection doesn't necessarily mean physical contact. One of the things that I love, so I have a child with schizophrenia, and I have a child with autism. And physical touch is difficult. Certain types of stimulation are difficult. So things like they get in crowds and their ability to connect with other people in crowds is very difficult. And so one of the things that I would recommend, Pilot, is work within your abilities. One of the things that my schizophrenic son absolutely loves is sports and athletics. He loves to discuss sports statistics. And one of the reasons he trusts me so implicitly is because he and I are able to have conversations where I engage in his interests. And when I do that and meet that need, he is able to come to me and talk to me about when he's struggling with things. So this is really work to your abilities. Now, on that sex one, we talk about sex in a way of sexual safety. So when we're talking about sex in the safety realm, we're talking about you're not being sexually coerced or abused. As far as your physiological needs, one of the greatest books out there on our physiological need for sex is Come As You Are, written by Emily Nagoski. Love that book. And one of the things that she addresses is that it is normal for us to have sexual needs that are very different from other people. So it is normal for some men to want sex multiple times a day and other men to not want it very often, if at all. When we're talking about sex from a physiological space, we don't necessarily need to rely on another human being to satisfy that urge, although that is, for most people, the preferred way to do that. But what we're talking about is self-stimulation if you need to. What they're talking about is when there is sexual tension or sexual frustration in place, releasing that frustration either through self-stimulation or through interactions with your intimate partner or an intimate partner, that becomes normal. Most men, and we find this in our men, most men will talk about, hey, when I'm able to have sexual release, whether by my own hands or by somebody else's, will say, they are able to think more clearly. They have less anxiety. They feel more at peace. That is because that release is a biological need. Now, if you're the type of person who doesn't feel that need or that urge, there is nothing wrong with you. That is very normal. I would say if you're concerned about it, go to the doctor just to rule out any of the things that could be biologically wrong, but it's very normal for people with special needs, especially those on the autism spectrum, to need to have that expressed differently. And so you're going to work with your abilities, meaning if you feel the urge, you're going to need to find a way to soothe that urge that works within your moral compass and your feelings of comfort. Does not necessarily mean you need to have sex with another person in order to get there. So hope that answers your question. And go ahead. I've got time. It says we've got one more question here. So would it be fair? This is from Michael. Would it be fair to say shifting accountability would be a behavior that would fit the more subtle religious modes of the drowning analogy you just used? Michael, can you give me a little bit more clarity? I'm not certain I understand how you're taking from the analogy of if I'm drowning, I might drown somebody else into a religious space. If you could speak to that a little bit more, I can, sing a song or do a little dance or something while you clarify that. I can say though, and maybe this will answer your question, but I'll give you a minute to clarify and whatnot, is that shifting accountability usually means that there's a feeling that you don't belong or you're not connected, so I need to fit in with my environment better, or that you don't feel safe. So if I'm shifting blame, I don't feel safe taking that accountability. So another example would be something along the lines of if I'm speeding down the freeway and it's my first ticket ever, or it's my first ticket and I don't have a whole bunch of them piled up, the likelihood that I'm going to be able to say, yeah, I'm sorry, officer, I was speeding is going to be higher than somebody who maybe has 4 or 5 speeding tickets. And if they get one more, their license is going to be revoked. That individual might have a more difficult time taking accountability for the fact that, yeah, I was speeding again. Sorry, officer. They might be more likely to lie and say something like, oh, my odometer's broken. I'm so sorry. That might be it, because there's a threat to their security or their security of resources and whatnot. Use of the devil, for example, as a scapegoat. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to say, yes, Michael, when, back to what I was just saying, that if you do not feel safe in your religious environment, or you don't feel like you belong, or there's connection from a spiritual standpoint, it is very natural and normal for us to shift the blame to somebody else. So an example in my personal life right now is that, so I'll just use one. My husband's cousin has been commenting on some things that my husband has posted. And if you follow our Unpacking Mormonism podcast, you've heard a lot of those stories in the stories in the past. But this cousin basically says, Mason, your problem is you can't stand up to Sarah, and Sarah is obviously evil because she drinks alcohol, she has tattoos, and she speaks so loud, and you're just a big wimp. So instead of his family being able to acknowledge that he's shifting away from Mormonism a little bit as his own research, his own thought process, his own whatever, they're turning me into the scapegoat. And a lot of that is coming because they feel like they are losing a stalwart, pedestal, active, good Mormon. And because it's, that's a threat to their eventual spiritual safety, they're going to be absolutely more likely to scapegoat or shift blame. So hope that answers your question. I've got to run because I've got a client here coming in about the next 7 minutes. So it has been great to be with you today. Wonderful answering these questions and talking to everybody. Please shoot me your questions if you've got any, or some examples to my email at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. We love to hear from our audience. and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.